everyone, and thank you for signing up for our webinar for April, Reducing Your Carbon Footprint. You probably already know you should reduce it, but what exactly is carbon footprint? We have here with us today Michelle Lee. She is a TED Talk speaker and founder of the agency Clever Carbon. She had dedicated her time and efforts on raising carbon literacy. So she's here to tell us today what is carbon footprint, how we can measure it, and which are the key parts on which we should focus our efforts. But before I give her the mic, a few things to mention. There will be a recording of this webinar session. It will be uploaded tomorrow on YouTube. Make sure to click the subscribe button on the left below the video. This way you'll be notified once the recording is up. Also, if you have any questions related to the topic, you can post them in the section Ask a Question on your left. Whole duration of the webinar is approximately 1 hour. So enough with the boring part, and now I give the mic to Michelle.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Good morning from New York. It's 11 a.m. over here, but I see from the chat that there's people from all over this world. I love how everyone's chiming in and introducing themselves. That's awesome. I wanted to really thank everyone for being here today to learn about carbon footprint. I promise you this is going to be a fun session. It's going to be engaging, and hopefully you'll feel like you learned something from it. So I really want to get started by asking everyone a question, and that is, how familiar are you with carbon footprint? Now, when I do these sessions, usually I get some ones and twos, which is totally fine. And if you are a three and you want to take over, I'm absolutely happy to hand over the mic. But I would love to kind of see, are you a one? Are you a two? One being like maybe a little bit new to the topic. Two, maybe you've done some research already. And three, you are a PhD expert. So let's see in the chat. What level are you, or how familiar are you with carbon footprint? Okay. Brittany is new to the topic. Steve is new. Chris is two, knows a little bit. That's awesome. Okay. So we've got a range of ones and twos, which is kind of usually around the same as I do for other webinars as well. But that's really awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And hopefully maybe at the end, you'll feel like you have bumped up one level, although, going from a two to a three is actually a big, big requirement of knowledge. But I wanted to say that, today we are going to chat about carbon footprint, but just a little bit of housekeeping is that it's zero judgment. Carbon footprint is data, and that's what's important. Data are facts, and they're to help you make decisions that are right for yourself. So there's no right, there's no wrong, there's data and what you want to do with it in your life. And usually sometimes there's video, but I see that this is not a platform that has video. So feel free to use the chat, and also probably not unmuting for discussions. But again, the chat will be there for you to use. So a quick introduction for myself. I'm currently based in New York, but I've had an opportunity to live in some pretty cool cities in my life. And I spent the majority of my career working in tech. I lived in, San Francisco and Silicon Valley. But today I spend 100% of my time on Clever Carbon, where I raise carbon footprint literacy. And the reason why I started Clever Carbon is because I'm very passionate about sustainability, and I like learning more information, but a lot of the content out there kind of gets me down. It's a lot of words around emergency and crisis, and I agree with all of that, but on a day-to-day basis, it's a little hard to be reminded every single day. So I thought to myself, why can't sustainability content be inviting? Why can't it be modern? Why can't it be hip and cool? Why can't it meet me where I am? And that's why we launched. Really what we're trying to do is we're trying to merge together pop culture and sustainability so that it's just information that everyone will know. And at Clever Carbon, we really try to break down that information in an easy way so I can have a conversation with my parents, my cousins, my friends, and their kids, and everyone has a language in which they can speak about climate. And recently, we were very excited to present at South by Southwest. It was on the topic of carbon footprint literacy and the future of consumer brands. And hopefully, maybe the slides that we're going through weren't actually being seen, but I think everyone can see my screen now. I wanted to give a shout out to my team because they are the driving force behind the work that we do. Everyone is a volunteer. They're from all around the world, from Jakarta to New York to Sao Paulo, and they work every day to help us produce content to help raise carbon footprint literacy. And the crux of kind of what we do is focused around our 2-minute carbon footprint quiz. And we're all actually going to have a chance to take that together in a moment here. But why do we even focus on carbon footprint anyways? There's so many things that we can teach people when it comes to sustainability. So, I think carbon footprint is really important because today we don't really have an objective way of communicating, just climate data and facts. For example, a single-use coffee cup and a flight. Both people like to call them, oh, they're bad or whatnot. And, I don't necessarily agree with bad. What if I told you that a single-use coffee cup emits 16 grams of carbon dioxide when we manufacture it, versus a flight is 121 kilograms of carbon dioxide, right? These are just facts. This is data. But how can we improve the way we communicate sustainability and impact information, right? Not just using these qualitative terms, but using data and facts. And at the end of the day, I think carbon footprint is really important because what gets measured gets changed. And so with that, I want to start by talking about what is carbon footprint, So let's take a step back and talk about our everyday activities. We drive, we take the subway or the train, we charge our phones, we make coffee in the morning, we have lunch. Every single one of those activities require energy, whether it's the form of electricity from gas or coal, or driving, deriving petroleum from oil. And today, most of our energy comes from fossil fuels. And fossil fuels, they actually naturally exist on Earth, and they're made of decomposing plants and animals, and they come in different forms. But what happens is that when we burn fossil fuels, we produce greenhouse gases, and those then get released into the atmosphere. And when greenhouse gases accumulate in the atmosphere, they trap the heat from our sunlight, and this leads to global warming and climate change. So the more greenhouse gases we have in the atmosphere, the warmer our planet. And there are really 3 main types of greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is the one that probably a lot of people have heard about. And carbon dioxide is the most common greenhouse gas produced. I would say it's like maybe around 70 to 75% of greenhouse gases. And then we have methane, which is 25 times more potent. And methane is commonly produced from cattle farming. And we also have nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And fertilizer production is a common way to emit nitrous oxide. And carbon footprint is really just the measure of the amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere for a particular activity. So you get to put sort of boundaries around what your measurement is. So let me give you an example. When we charge our phone for 5 minutes, there's a carbon footprint for that. When we charge our phone for 10 minutes, there's a carbon footprint for that. When we eat an apple has a carbon footprint. When we take public transportation for 10 minutes, there's a carbon footprint for that. Individuals can have an annual or monthly or a daily carbon footprint. Companies can have a carbon footprint. Countries can have a carbon footprint. So there's really sort of, you get to determine where it starts and where it stops. And, communicating what your boundaries are is very helpful. Because we all use electricity and fuel in our lives, we all have a carbon footprint too. So for example, my friend here, Sally, her carbon footprint is 8.2 tons of CO2 annually. And 1 ton is 1,000 kilograms. My friend Theo, his is 25.7. And you can see, everyone has a different carbon footprint. And the everyday decisions that we make in our life impact our carbon footprint. Whether we're consuming a potato, which is on average 40 grams of CO2 per potato, or a serving of pork, which is 1,800 grams of CO2, or beef, which is 7,700 grams of CO2. These are all one serving. Or, even a toilet paper, a roll of toilet paper is 1,300 grams. Every single decision we make typically has a carbon footprint or an impact associated. So let's see the chat light up again. What is something that you've done or encountered today that has a carbon footprint? Monitoring the chat now. Let's see the first couple come through. I'm going to read them out. Okay, Daniel showered. Absolutely. We need hot water, right? Someone drove. Always get making coffee. Watching this webinar has a carbon footprint. Absolutely. A cup of tea, office lights, overwhelming amount of coffees, made breakfast, internet usage. Absolutely. So everyone is getting the hang of this. And I'm glad everyone is in the chat now, because this is setting us up for our next section, which is a pop quiz. And I want everyone to participate in this, okay? Now, if you were paying attention to a few of the things that I read out before, you might be able to answer this question. What do you think the average carbon footprint of an apple is? Is it A, B, C, or D? Let's see what people think in the chat. Okay. Shireen says B. Okay. Joachim says B. We've got some B's, some A's. We've even got a D, 1,050. Okay. Now, if you were paying really close attention to maybe a couple minutes ago, you will remember potato is 40 grams of CO2. So maybe that will give it away. And the answer is an apple is on average 35 grams of CO2. And, I will say that this really depends on, which country your apple came from, how far did your apple travel from you to the store, but on average, an apple is 35 grams of CO2. Now, what about the average carbon footprint of a serving of chicken? What does everyone think? Is that how much more is chicken? Everyone's taking it a moment to think about it, but we've got some A's, we've got a C, some B's. Okay, overwhelming amount of A's. Okay, that's great. So as the answers are coming in, I'm going to share with you that the average serving of chicken is 1,360 grams of CO2. Okay. Now, what about the average carbon footprint of a dairy latte? Okay. Where do you think that is? Okay, Joachim says B. Shireen's B. Kristen says B. We've got some D's in there. So people think that a dairy latte can be pretty close to a serving of chicken as well. Okay. Now I'm going to give you the answer. The answer is 350 grams of CO2. So it's not as much as a serving of chicken, but it's definitely higher than an apple. Now, my next question is, what about a plant-based latte? So a dairy latte was 350 grams, okay? What about a plant-based latte? Okay, I've got a C here from Pete. John and Wendy and Crystal also say C. Okay, we've got lots of C's. Okay, we've got a D as well. Okay, and I think everyone's sort of getting the hang of it. So the answer is C. So dairy latte is 350 grams and a plant-based latte is 140 grams. And you can see that plant-based milks are lower carbon footprint on average, but at the end of the day, it's not only our carbon footprint, right? There's waste footprint, there's water footprint. So, if this matters to you, really do your research to see which types of milks suit you better in terms of what your values are. And just as an FYI, a cup of coffee without any dairy is around 50 grams of CO2. So you can see that, the carbon footprint of coffee actually really comes from the dairy, not from the coffee itself. So my next question is, what do you think the average carbon footprint of an email is? Because yes, emails have carbon footprints too. Now, I would say an average email is probably black and white text. It probably doesn't have any images, just like an email with a couple of lines here. We've got some A's and some C's. And Elizabeth, if you want to know about the carbon footprint of a cup of tea, you can go to our website. We have a list of a carbon footprint of common items. Okay, we've got some B's and D's. So we are kind of all over the map here as a group. Like, what is the average carbon footprint of an email? And the answer, I'm going to give it away, is D. So this is an email, again, that is just black and white text, doesn't have images or attachments or anything like that. It's around 4 grams. And the point is that emails have carbon footprints. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the session as well. Now, I have a couple more questions, so let's get through this together. What do you think the average annual footprint of someone living in the United Kingdom is? Now, remember, 1 ton is 1,000 kilograms, and the first one is always a little bit of a guess. Once you have context, then you can make a better, more informed guess. But we already have one answer. Anne thinks it's B, 3.4 tons. What are some other answers here? We've got some C's and some A's and some B's. What I actually don't see, and I just saw now from Chris, is D. So the answer is D. The average carbon footprint of an individual in the UK is 8.3 tons. Now, next question is, what do you think the carbon footprint of someone in Vietnam is? And I think people are still putting in their answers for the UK, but now we're switching to Vietnam. So if the UK is 8.3, what is Vietnam? Got a B. Okay. So people think it's lower. Overwhelming amount of B's. We've got 1 D here. Okay. I'm going to let people put in their answers. We've got an A as well, but lots and lots and lots of B's. And congrats for those who selected B. You are correct. The average in Vietnam is 2.1 tons. Now, what about the US? Okay. What do you think the carbon footprint of the US is? We've got a D from Denise. We've got a C, some B's, some more D's here. Okay. Interesting. So people do think that the UK and the US are similar in carbon footprint. Okay. We've got some B's as well, 33.7 tons. Okay. So the answer is 17.5 tons. Okay. So you can see here that depending on what country you live in, your carbon footprint on average can be very different. And this depends on a number of different factors: your access to renewable energy, your country's diet preferences, the flying culture within your country as well. So lots of interesting things to ponder here. And now we're actually all going to take the carbon footprint quiz together and find out our carbon footprint. So everyone on this call is going to walk away knowing what their carbon footprint is. So go ahead, take the quiz, and find out your carbon footprint. So you're going to get a couple minutes to go ahead and do this. And when you're done the quiz, if you can give me a thumbs up in the chat or just say done, then I'll know that people have completed it and I'll continue moving on. But Please take the quiz now and find out what your carbon footprint is. Also going to drop in a link here so that you can see the carbon footprint of other countries if you're interested. I actually find it really fascinating to look through the different countries and see what the average carbon footprint is. All right, I'm seeing some quizzes come through. Looks like people answered the 6 questions. Okay. So everyone should be seeing a screen that's similar to the one here. Thank you, Chris and Pete, for letting me know that you're done. And you'll see that you have a results page. You will have a color picker where you can pick the color of your badge. Your badge will look a little bit different than the one here because you have an Earth Day themed badge, which we're doing for April. And, if I can ask you to give me a hand, share the badge, share it on LinkedIn, share it on Instagram, share it on Twitter, share the links so that more people can take the quiz and learn about their carbon footprint. Because again, speaking objectively and using data and facts is so important in our climate progression as a society here. So looks like everyone is done. People even are posting a little bit about their carbon footprint. I think what would be helpful is if you post your footprint and then tell us what country you're from so that we can kind of see, like what is the range of the different countries here? So as people, feel free to post your carbon footprint and what country you are from. I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about diet because, diet is something that we do every day. We eat every day. It's easy to sort of make some changes and make more informed decisions here. So I want to do a little bit more of a deep dive on our diet. And just starting with an apple, right? It's 35 grams of CO2. Again, a serving of beef, pork, and chicken. You can see the information there. And rice is actually pretty high when it comes to carbon footprint for something that's plant-based. And that's because when rice paddies are flooded, methane is produced. And as a result, it has a higher carbon footprint. So eat every single little grain of that rice because it has a footprint, okay? Now, what I want to do is in the next few minutes, I want to do a deep dive on the carbon footprint of an apple. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. Where does the carbon footprint from an apple even come from? So first of all, we need to talk about when we grow the apple. We often use tractors or equipment that require fuel and energy. We use fertilizers, which releases nitrous oxide, if you remember. And once we grow the apples, we then also need to harvest them, right? So then there are emissions from the harvesting equipment, from factories sometimes, we put wax on apples and there's some emissions there. And then we also need to store the apples. So before we ship them out to the stores, we need to put them in a warehouse and we need to keep that warehouse really cold. And as a result, there are carbon emissions for the air conditioning. And then we need to transport the apple. Most of the time, I would say it's probably with a truck, but sometimes we ship them overseas. And, I used to live in Toronto and I remember seeing in their grocery store that they had imported these Fuji apples from Japan. And so, they do get shipped by air as well. And then there's a little bit of a footprint in emissions in retail, but that's spread across all the items in the stores. So it's a bit of a smaller emissions. But then when we eat an apple, depending on how we eat the apple, there are different emissions as well, right? So if we eat the apple raw, that's pretty straightforward. But if we eat an apple pie, we're heating an oven for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and depending if you have a gas or an electric oven, it could have a higher carbon footprint or a lower carbon footprint. And also the processing of the pastry, the manufacturing of the tin, like little pan here, or if we're dehydrating apples or making applesauce, there's jars and lids as well. So that adds to the carbon emissions of an apple. And again, this is neither good nor bad. These are all just facts. And it doesn't end there, right? Once we're done with the apple, assuming people don't eat the core, it can either go into our landfill, so you just throw it in the garbage, or you can compost it, right? Now, when you throw food into the landfill, again, it goes underneath the ground and there's no oxygen. And as a result, methane is produced. And as you may remember, methane is 25 times more potent than CO2. But when we compost, what happens is carbon dioxide is produced instead of methane. And this apple decomposes into the soil, and this soil then goes back into the land to nourish other crops. So compost has many, many different benefits, including the fact that it actually goes back to the land. Okay. So this is a framework that you can essentially use for any item that you purchase. Maybe you're buying a t-shirt, right? You're not growing a t-shirt, but you need to get the materials to have the t-shirt manufactured. It then needs to be produced in the factory. It then needs to get transported to a certain location. So, this is a simple example for an apple, but whether you're buying an electronics item or another food item, you can use this same framework and sort of think through where the carbon emissions are coming from. Now, I would love your participation again. What are some ways we can reduce the carbon emissions of an apple? Based on some of the information I shared before, what are some of the ways that we can reduce the emissions? Oh, well, Himanshu eats the core, buy local, compost. Yeah, grow your own apples. I don't know if actually growing your own apples is going to do the trick, because then you'd have to grow your own beans, Brussels sprouts, broccoli. You need a lot of land to do that. Buy local, grow it at home. Those are all great answers. And some of the ones that I have here are eating organic so that we don't use fertilizers, reducing waste, right? Sometimes we buy all these apples and we don't eat them and we end up throwing them away. So if we're more conscious about what we buy, that could help. Eat apples when they're in season, right? So they're not always in season. And if you buy an apple when they're not in season, it's likely that they came from further away. Okay. Local farmers market, that came up a lot, and composting came up a lot as well. So great job, everyone. Now, here is a really fun resource that you can download. This is our pocket guide, and it has the carbon footprint of a lot of common items on it that you can save on your phone. The idea is to have this handy so that when people are, talking about carbon footprint, you can have this, pull it up, and have all the reference data on there. So maybe you're going to have more conversations at the dinner table around carbon footprint. I would certainly hope so. The more we talk about it, the faster people learn about it. So be sure to download that and save it to your phone. Now, I want to talk about one more thing, which is, why does an email have a carbon footprint? Right? Does anyone know why an email has a carbon footprint? I'm going to wait a minute here and see what everyone thinks. Yeah, we've got energy, electricity, the servers, electricity from our computers. Absolutely. Yeah. Everyone is spot on there. So basically, our emails live on these giant servers that are pretty usually kind of remote. We don't really see them. And they have a lot of equipment in there, lots and lots of servers racks and racks and racks of servers. They generate a lot of heat, and the warehouse and the data center essentially need a lot of energy to cool down the data center. So it's very energy intensive. The servers need energy, the warehouse needs energy, and also there's carbon footprint in producing the hardware. So whether it's the server racks or the hardware itself, all of that has a carbon footprint to manufacture. So anyone have some good ideas on what are some ways we can reduce carbon emissions from emails? Ooh, I like that, Anna. Choose green hosting. Yeah. Delete your emails. That's absolutely right. Mhm. Build data centers in the Arctic. That would be kind of sad. Set browser to dark mode. That's an interesting one. Yeah, because light requires more energy. So when you use darker ones, you're not using as much energy for your monitor, right? So some of the ideas that I have here are when we send attachments, we want to share a file, send a link instead of attaching the file itself. And there's actually multiple benefits of doing that. One is that it's a lower carbon footprint because you don't have to create multiple copies of the same document on a server. Additionally, it's more secure, right? Your link can have permissions and access control. And also, it's kind of convenient, right? If you send a link to a folder, you can always switch out the document without having to resend the attachment. So, where you can and when you're sharing attachments, share a link to a folder and purge your emails regularly, which came up in the chat. Unsubscribe from your mailing lists. Maybe innovate on how we market, right? Like, do we need to be sending all these emails all the time? What are some other innovative, sort of low carbon ways to market? And getting some help from our email management. So having Google or Microsoft help us purge some of our old emails, that would be really helpful. This here is an out of office reply that is sort of fun. So if you're going out of office soon, you could potentially use our little template here, plug in your dates, and help raise carbon footprint literacy while you're on vacation. So I just put in the link here of where you can copy and paste that email template, and feel free to use that. So there's a lot to say when it comes to carbon footprint, but we only have a certain amount of time. So kind of want to wrap it up in terms of, everything that we've sort of gone through today. I hope that the key takeaway is, let's be objective. Let's use data and facts. Let's not tell people what to do, but help them make their own decisions by sharing data. And we actually just shared a post today on some really powerful information, which is the current concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So back in the 1900s, if we start at the bottom there, the concentration of CO2 was 296 parts per million. So that's the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And today, the concentration is 418 parts per million in 2022. And experts say that in order for us to achieve a stable climate, we need to be under 350 parts per million. So a little bit of food for thought for everyone. And if you want to see more information on this, head over to our Instagram or our LinkedIn. There's a lot of information in terms of these numbers and how to take action with them. And just one more little graph here, you can see that for the last couple hundred years, we were under 300 parts per million. With the Industrial Revolution, we definitely have a higher, increase in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And if you have a question, please post it in the questions part. And I'm going to leave everyone with one more resource here, which is Clever Actions. It is our corporate sustainability program. It's completely free to use and has a lot of tips on how companies can incorporate sustainability into the company culture, lots of little fun activities you can do for fun, and lots of practical ones as well, like start measuring your energy use at your office and looking at the numbers and seeing how you can do better month over month and year over year. And I'm going to leave you with this last quote that we kind of started with. Remember, what gets measured gets changed. So thank you everyone for joining today. Right. Looks like Gagana was logged off. Hold on. So I'll try to answer some of these questions here. So, what is a good tool to calculate carbon footprint for both individuals and organizations? So, when it comes to individuals, the inputs are very different than when it comes to a company. And I think that there are a lot of different tools out there, and I feel hesitant to endorse any because for myself, I'm actually calculating the carbon footprint of my company through a third party consultant called W2R. I'm not using software to do that, but there are software out there, and I would encourage everyone to test a few out and give it a try and see, which one resonates for you. There's a good balance between ease of use and the amount of details that you have to like feed in. So, there are free tools out there. I would encourage people to do a little Google search and try a few of them. Is it carbon efficient to install a small solar panel on a roof that will be shaded for several hours per day? So you really, again, Chris, I can't tell you because I can't see the data. I think you need to understand installing the solar panel. What was the carbon footprint of manufacturing the solar panel? How long will it be in use? Over the course of a year, how much sun are you going to expect to have? And what is your current emissions now in electricity? And how much will the solar panel actually remove? And I think it will depend how long it's in use. So the longer it is in use, the more carbon efficient it is. But without seeing the numbers specifically for your home, it's hard for me to give you an answer. But again, it's looking at the data, right? We also have a question from Lior. I'm a manager for a business in tourism that is collecting money to offset the traveler's carbon footprint. We are still considering where to donate to or what to do with the donations. What would be a way to donate, use the collected funds? So, I'm curious, Lior, if you are collecting donations based on just the trip in general, like maybe $50 for the trip, or if you're actually measuring the emissions of a trip. So depending on which trip you take, maybe your carbon emissions are different and the amount you offset is different. And I have sort of two thoughts around this. So one is carbon offset versus carbon removal is really key. So I'm going to go back to the slide here where let me see if I can share my screen here again. Okay. So if we look back to this screen, right, carbon offsetting means we are going to stay at 418 parts per million. So I actually believe in the thought of carbon removal and not carbon offsetting. When we go on vacation, can we actually remove extra carbon? Like, how can we remove more carbon than just offsetting? Because as you can see, if we want to get to 350, we're going to need to do more than offsetting. And, I encourage everyone to do a Google search or a web search or an Ecosia search to see what types of carbon removal solutions are out there. I have my personal opinion, but I think everyone should develop their own opinion. And, what I will say is, nature-based solutions they already exist today. In fact, nature removes 50% of the carbon emissions that we produce, and the other 50% goes up into the atmosphere. So, look into different nature-based solutions. And another data piece is, our planet is 30% land and 70% water. And our oceans are already natural carbon sinks. So, if we have 70% to work with, why would we not focus a little bit more on that? So that's what I'm going to say, Lior, in answer to your question there. Where can you purchase carbon credits? So there are marketplaces out there where you can purchase carbon credits. Carbon credits are different from carbon removal. Carbon credits are an official sort of exchange where companies can buy credits to offset their emissions. And again, there are different exchanges out there. That's not really my area of expertise, but if you do a quick Google search, Perry, I'm sure you can find that.
Okay, I think these were all of the questions. Thank you so much for this presentation, Michelle. I personally learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers as well. This recording will be uploaded tomorrow on our YouTube channel. You can click the green button below the video to be notified once the recording is uploaded. Thank you so much to all our viewers, and thank you for being here with us today, Michelle, and sharing all your knowledge. It was a pleasure.
Thank
Stay safe and stay curious. See you at our next webinar.
you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.